One of these had its female lead kidnapped, tortured, and the film played it for laughs. One depicted minors in situations so inappropriate that even mentioning the premise gets uncomfortable. And one took a subject so sensitive that the mere suggestion of remaking it would end a career before the pitch meeting finished. Number 11, Revenge of the Nerds, 1984. Jeff Kanew directed this one for 20th Century Fox and Interscope Communications with a budget of approximately $8 million and delivered what became one of the defining comedies of the decade. A film so commercially successful and so culturally embedded that it spawned 3 direct-to-video sequels and influenced an entire generation's understanding of underdog narratives. It grossed over $40 million domestically. Critics were divided, but audiences loved it completely. And watching it today with any awareness of contemporary standards around consent and sexual conduct produces a viewing experience so uncomfortable that the film functions almost as an accidental document of how radically cultural attitudes have shifted in 40 years. The premise is straightforward enough. A group of socially awkward college freshmen, the nerds, are hazed and humiliated by the jock fraternity and eventually fight back by forming their own fraternity and using their technical skills to humiliate the jocks in return. The broad strokes are familiar underdog comedy material. The specific execution includes a scene in which one of the nerds, Lewis, wears a Darth Vader mask to impersonate a jock and has sex with the jock's girlfriend Betty, who does not discover the deception until after the encounter is complete. The film presents this as a triumphant moment. Lewis gets the girl. Betty is charmed by his technical prowess. The audience in 1984 laughed and cheered. That scene is rape by deception. There is no interpretation of contemporary consent standards under which it qualifies as anything else. Betty could not consent to sex with Lewis because she believed she was consenting to sex with someone else entirely. The film does not acknowledge this. The film presents it as a romantic victory, as the moment when the nerds prove they can compete with the jocks, even in sexual conquest, which is itself a framework so deeply uncomfortable that unpacking it fully would require more space than is available here. Robert Carradine and Anthony Edwards, who played Lewis and Gilbert, have both been asked about the scene in subsequent interviews and have given answers ranging from defensive to uncomfortable to genuinely reflective about what they participated in. The film was a product of its time. That explanation is accurate and also completely insufficient as moral absolution. The time it was a product of was a time with profoundly broken ideas about consent, about women, about what constituted acceptable comedic material. The fact that audiences laughed in 1984 does not make the material less disturbing. It makes the culture that produced the laughter more worthy of examination. No major studio would make this film today. The premise could survive. The underdog narrative has permanent appeal, but the execution, the specific choices about how that narrative unfolds, would be flagged in the first script meeting, and the project would die quietly before anyone had to explain publicly why it was being killed. Number 10, 16 Candles, 1984.
How's it going?
John Hughes wrote and directed this one for Universal Pictures and launched both Molly Ringwald's career and his own decade-long dominance of the teen comedy genre. The film cost approximately $6.5 million to make and grossed over $23 million domestically. It is remembered fondly by an entire generation as a defining artifact of 1980s adolescence. It contains a sustained subplot involving a teenage girl who is too drunk to consent being passed between teenage boys like property. And the film treats this as a comedic complication rather than as a crime being committed on screen. Ringwald plays Samantha Baker, a high school junior whose family forgets her 16th birthday because her older sister is getting married the same weekend. She is in love with a senior named Jake Ryan. Jake is dating Caroline, the most popular girl in school. The film follows Samantha through the disaster of her forgotten birthday, while Jake becomes increasingly aware that he is dating someone he does not actually like, and increasingly interested in the sophomore who keeps staring at him. The Caroline subplot is where the film goes somewhere no contemporary studio comedy could follow. Caroline gets extremely drunk at a party. Jake, frustrated with their relationship, essentially gives Caroline to Ted, a freshman played by Anthony Michael Hall, who has been pursuing Samantha unsuccessfully all night. Jake tells Ted he can have Caroline. Ted puts the unconscious Caroline in a car. The film then cuts to the next morning, where Caroline wakes up next to Ted, asks what happened, and Ted implies they had sex. Caroline's response is essentially positive. She seems charmed. The film portrays this as Ted's triumph. Hughes has been asked about this in interviews, and his responses have been somewhere between defensive and dismissive. He made a film about teenage experience that reflected the casual attitudes toward consent and alcohol and sexual conduct that were genuinely common in suburban American high schools in the early 1980s. That is probably true. It is also true that what he captured was genuinely terrible, and that presenting it without critique or consequence was a choice that has not aged into something defensible. The Long Duke Dong character, played by Gede Watanabe, represents a separate set of problems that are equally disqualifying for contemporary production. The character is a crude Asian stereotype played entirely for broad ethnic comedy. Every scene he appears in relies on the audience finding his foreignness inherently ridiculous. Watanabe has spoken about the role with genuine ambivalence, acknowledging that it gave him work and visibility, while also recognizing that it contributed to stereotypes that caused genuine harm. Ringwald herself has written about revisiting the film as an adult and mother, and finding elements of it genuinely disturbing that she did not recognize as a teenager performing in it. Her willingness to engage critically with material that built her career is worth considerably more than most nostalgia-driven defenses of the film's cultural significance. 16 Candles is a document of its moment. That moment had serious problems. The film reflected them without examining them. That reflection is valuable as history. It would be completely unacceptable as a new production. Number 9, Year of the Dragon, 1985.
Is that Jackie Wang was more than the unofficial mayor of Chinatown.
Michael Cimino directed this one for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and Dino De Laurentiis, with a screenplay by Oliver Stone based on Robert Daly's novel. And the combination of Cimino's visual ambition and Stone's maximalist approach to dialogue produced something so relentlessly controversial that protests began before filming was complete and continued through the theatrical run and for years afterward. The film depicts New York's Chinatown through the perspective of a white police captain convinced that Chinese organized crime represents an existential threat to the city. And the racial politics of that framework are so fraught that even describing the premise accurately requires immediate qualification. Mickey Rourke plays Stanley White, a decorated Vietnam veteran who takes command of a Chinatown precinct and decides to dismantle the triads regardless of political pressure or community opposition. John Lone plays Joey Tai, the young triad leader White targets. The conflict between them is presented as a clash between American law enforcement idealism and Chinese criminal pragmatism, which is already a framework with serious problems. And the film compounds those problems by surrounding the central conflict with imagery and dialogue that Asian American community organizations identified immediately as contributing to harmful stereotypes. The protests were organized and sustained. The Coalition of Asians to Nix Year of the Dragon picketed theaters in multiple cities. Community leaders gave interviews articulating specific objections to the film's depiction of Chinatown as a lawless enclave, its suggestion that all Chinese businesses were fronts for criminal operations, and its use of white as the righteous outsider needed to bring order to a community incapable of policing itself. These were not fringe criticisms. These were mainstream responses from established community organizations. Cimino and Stone defended the film by arguing it was based on investigative journalism and reflected genuine criminal activity. That defense misses the point in ways that suggest either deliberate evasion or genuine failure to understand what the criticism was actually addressing. Nobody was arguing that Chinese organized crime did not exist. The argument was that the film's depiction contributed to a broader pattern of representation that portrayed Asian communities monolithically as inscrutable, criminal, and requiring white intervention to achieve legitimacy. The film made approximately $18 million domestically against a production budget that various sources place between $24 and $33 million. MGM considered it a commercial disappointment. Cimino's career, already damaged by Heaven's Gate, never recovered the momentum the deer hunter had given him. Stone went on to Platoon the following year and built the career that defined his 1980s and 90s output. No major studio would make Year of the Dragon today. The framework is disqualified before the script reaches the dialogue, and the dialogue would compound the problems exponentially. The film exists as a document of how representation operated in mainstream American cinema in 1985. That operation was harmful. The documentation is valuable specifically because the harm it records is harm contemporary production has worked to avoid. Number 8. Body Double, 1984. Brian De Palma made this one for Columbia Pictures with a budget of approximately $10 million and delivered something so aggressively Hitchcockian in its influences and so graphically violent in its execution that it generated immediate controversy from both feminist critics who saw it as misogynistic exploitation and conservative groups who objected to its sexual content. De Palma was working in the mode that had defined his entire career, using Hitchcock's visual grammar to explore themes of voyeurism and violence. But Body Double pushed the combination of eroticism and brutality further than anything he had made previously, including Dressed to Kill, which had itself been extremely controversial 4 years earlier. Craig Wasson plays Jake Scully, a struggling actor who loses his girlfriend and his apartment on the same day and accepts a house-sitting job in the Hollywood Hills. The house has a telescope positioned to look into a neighboring home, where a woman performs an elaborate nightly striptease in front of her window. Jake becomes obsessed with watching her. He follows her, and eventually he witnesses her murder via a power drill in a sequence De Palma shoots with the extended, fetishistic attention that became his signature and his primary source of critical controversy. The drill sequence is the thing that made Body Double impossible to defend in certain critical circles. The extended focus on the woman's terror, the phallic symbolism of the drill itself, the way De Palma stages the violence with the same visual inventiveness he brings to the erotic sequences, all combined to produce something that many critics read as actively celebrating violence against women, rather than examining it critically. De Palma's response has always been that he is exploring the act of looking, that the film is about voyeurism, and the way cinema itself is implicated in voyeuristic practice, and that making the audience uncomfortable with their own act of watching is the entire point. That defense is sophisticated and not obviously wrong. It is also true that the line between critique and participation becomes extraordinarily difficult to identify when the thing being critiqued is depicted with such sustained visual intensity. De Palma's camera loves the violence it is supposedly critiquing. Whether that love is part of the critique or evidence that the critique is insufficient remains genuinely arguable. Melanie Griffith appears in the film's second half as an adult film actress who becomes involved in Jake's investigation, and the film uses the adult film industry as both narrative device and thematic commentary on the relationship between sex and watching. The sequences set in the adult film production are among the most explicit mainstream Hollywood produced in the 1980s. The film grossed approximately $8 million domestically, which Columbia considered a significant disappointment given the budget and the controversy, which the studio had hoped would translate to curiosity and ticket sales. Critics were divided along predictable lines. Pauline Kael loved it. Gene Siskel called it despicable. Roger Ebert was somewhere in between. No contemporary studio would make Body Double. The extended violence, the sexual content, and the gender politics of the entire framework would generate internal objections long before the project reached production. De Palma built a career exploring these specific themes in these specific ways. That career is over in mainstream studio terms, regardless of his interest in continuing it. Number 7. Hardcore, 1979.
Jake, Mr. Holcomb? Pete? Yeah, Pete.
Paul Schrader wrote and directed this one for Columbia Pictures, with George C. Scott in the lead, and delivered something so uncompromising in its depiction of the adult film industry, and so religiously intense in its examination of faith and moral corruption, that Columbia had no idea how to market it, and essentially abandoned the theatrical release before it could find the audience it deserved. The film grossed approximately $3 million domestically against an approximately $3 million budget, which meant it technically broke even, but represented complete commercial failure for a production with Scott's involvement and Schrader's profile coming off Taxi Driver. Scott plays Jake Van Dorn, a devoutly Calvinist businessman from Grand Rapids, Michigan, whose teenage daughter disappears during a church youth trip to California. Jake hires a private investigator who discovers that Jake's daughter has appeared in a pornographic film. Jake travels to Los Angeles and descends into the underworld of the adult film industry searching for her. And the film follows that descent with an anthropological attention to the specific textures of that world that mainstream Hollywood had never attempted before and has rarely attempted since. Schrader had written Taxi Driver 3 years earlier, and the thematic continuity between Travis Bickle and Jake Van Dorn is unmistakable. Both men are engaged in rescue missions. Both descend into worlds they do not understand and cannot control. Both use violence as the method for restoring order to a situation that has moved beyond their comprehension. The difference is that Jake's faith gives him a moral framework that Travis completely lacks, and that framework makes him simultaneously more sympathetic and more genuinely disturbing, because his certainty about his own righteousness is absolute. The film depicts adult film sets, peep show booths, and sex industry transactions with a specificity that generated immediate certification problems. The MPAA gave it an X rating initially, and Columbia demanded cuts before they would release it. Schrader cut reluctantly, and the R-rated version lost some of the immersive power the original cut had achieved. The adult industry sequences are not presented as titillating. They are presented as assembly line labor performed by people for whom the work is purely economic transaction. And that desexualized depiction of the sex industry was itself controversial in ways Schrader had not fully anticipated. Susan Hubley plays Nikki, a young sex worker who becomes Jake's guide through the industry, and her performance is the film's emotional center in ways the screenplay does not fully support. She brings a humanity and a specificity to the role that makes Jake's certainty about his mission increasingly difficult to sustain morally, and the film's ending, which Schrader later said he was dissatisfied with, reflects the difficulty of resolving the collision between Jake's faith and the actual complexity of the world he has entered. No studio would make hardcore today. The depiction of the adult industry would be flagged immediately. The religious framework would be considered commercially unviable. The ending would be deemed insufficiently clear. The film Schrader made exists because 1979, Columbia was willing to take risks on difficult material. Contemporary studios have systematically eliminated that willingness from their development process. Number 6, Risky Business, 1983.
Just take those old records off the shelf.
That's her. She's fantastic.
Paul Brickman wrote and directed this one for the Geffen Company and Warner Brothers with a budget of approximately $6.5 million and launched Tom Cruise into stardom with a performance that defined his screen persona for the following decade. The film grossed over $63 million domestically and became one of the defining artifacts of 1980s youth culture. It is remembered primarily for the underwear dance sequence set to Bob Seger's old-time rock and roll. What is remembered less clearly is that the film's central premise involves a 17-year-old high school student starting a prostitution ring, and the film treats this entrepreneurial venture as a coming-of-age triumph. Cruise plays Joel Goodson, a suburban Chicago teenager whose parents leave him alone for a weekend. A series of mishaps involving a call girl named Lana, played by Rebecca De Mornay, and his father's Porsche leads Joel into debt. To raise the money, Joel and Lana convert his parents' house into a temporary brothel, servicing his classmates and their fathers. The film presents this as Joel's transformation from anxious rule follower into confident risk taker. The final act involves Joel applying to Princeton. His interviewer, impressed by Joel's initiative regarding the house party business, accepts him into the university. The film ends with Joel's voiceover reflecting on his experiences with satisfaction. He has become a man, he has learned how business works. The fact that the business in question was sex trafficking of his classmates is not presented as morally problematic. Brickman has suggested he viewed the prostitution element as metaphorical rather than literal, a satirical take on capitalism. That interpretation is visible in certain elements, but the actual events depicted involve a minor organizing sexual transactions for profit. And no amount of satirical framing changes what those events literally are. No studio would make risky business today with a 17-year-old protagonist. The premise could survive if Joel were aged up to college, but the specific transgression of a minor engaging in sex trafficking would be flagged immediately. The film exists as a document of what mainstream 1980s cinema was willing to present as aspirational coming-of-age material. Number 5, class of 1984-1982.
The allegiance is to themselves.
Still believe in all.
Mark Gales. Lester directed this Canadian production for Gorilla High Productions with a budget of approximately $1.5 million and delivered something so graphically violent in its depiction of high school as a war zone that it was banned outright in several countries. The film is set in a Lincoln high school where gangs control the hallways, drug dealing occurs openly, and teachers have essentially abandoned education in favor of survival. Into this environment arrives Andrew Norris, a music teacher who believes education can still function. Perry King plays Norris with idealism that the film systematically destroys. Roddy McDowell plays a biology teacher who has given up entirely. The gang controlling the school is led by Peter Stegman, played by Timothy Van Patten, and the escalating conflict culminates in violence so sustained that several sequences had to be cut before various certification boards would approve theatrical release. The film's premise is that urban schools have deteriorated so completely that they function as lawless zones where adult authority has collapsed. Students carry weapons openly. Teachers are assaulted. The film presents this not as isolated incidents, but as systemic conditions. That presentation generated immediate pushback from educators, who argued the film was presenting a deliberately sensationalized vision that bore almost no relationship to actual conditions. The violence escalates throughout. A teacher is drugged and assaulted. Norris's pregnant wife is terrorized. The climax involves Norris hunting the gang through the darkened school. The film ends with Norris killing Stegman, and that ending is presented not as a tragedy, but as a justified conclusion. No contemporary studio would make Class of 1984. The depiction of school violence in this register would be considered irresponsible in a post-Columbine environment where school shootings are documented reality rather than exploitation premise. The racial politics would be flagged immediately. The ending's endorsement of teacher as vigilante would be rejected. The film exists as a document of early 1980s exploitation. Cinema's willingness to use urban decay as raw material without meaningful attention to real conditions. Number 4, Vice Squad, 1982. Gary Sherman directed this one for AVCO Embassy Pictures with a budget of approximately $2 million and delivered one of the most unrelentingly brutal depictions of street prostitution the decade produced. The film stars Susan Hubley as Princess, a sex worker in Los Angeles, and Wings Hauser as Ramrod, her psychotically violent pimp. The MPAA initially gave it an X rating. Sherman cut it down to scrape an R. The material that survived is still extraordinarily difficult to watch. The premise is procedural. Detective Tom Walsh needs Princess to testify against Ramrod, who is wanted for murder. Princess agrees on the condition that Walsh will protect her for the night. Ramrod escapes custody. The rest of the film is a sustained chase through the Los Angeles sex work district as Ramrod hunts Princess, while Walsh tries to keep her alive. Hauser's performance as Ramrod is genuinely terrifying. He plays the character with zero psychological depth and zero redemptive qualities. Ramrod is a sadist who views the women working for him as property and who punishes any assertion of independence with immediate violence. The opening sequence in which Ramrod brutalizes Princess with a coat hanger is one of the most disturbing pieces of screen violence the decade produced. Hubley gives an extraordinary performance. Princess is not presented as a victim waiting for rescue. She is presented as someone navigating an extraordinarily dangerous environment, whatever tools she has available, and Hubley plays her survival instincts and professional competence with equal weight. The film's gender politics are complicated. It depicts the violence sex workers face with unflinching attention. It also uses that violence as spectacle. The film made approximately $9 million domestically, which, on its tiny budget, was significant. No studio would make Vice Squad today. The graphic violence against women would be flagged immediately as gratuitous. The depiction of sex work as uniformly brutal would generate pushback. The absence of structural analysis would be identified as a disqualifying gap. Number 3. Angel Heart, 1987. Alan Parker wrote and directed this one for Carolco Pictures based on William Hjortsberg's novel Falling Angel, and delivered something so graphically violent and sexually explicit that the MPAA gave it an X rating. Parker had to cut 10 seconds from a single sex scene to secure an R. Those 10 seconds involved Mickey Rourke and Lisa Bonet in a sequence that intercut their sexual encounter with blood dripping from the ceiling. Rourke plays Harry Angel, a private detective in 1955 New York, hired by Louis Cyphre, played by Robert De Niro, to find a missing crooner named Johnny Favorite. The investigation takes Harry to New Orleans and deeper into a world of voodoo and ritual murder. The ending reveals that Harry is actually Johnny Favorite and has been investigating himself. After making a Faustian bargain, he has repressed entirely. The violence throughout is extraordinary. People are shot at close range. Throats are cut. Eyes are removed. Bodies are mutilated in rituals that Parker depicts with unflinching attention. The film is not using violence for shock. It is using violence as a theological argument, and that seriousness does not make it easier to watch. Lisa Bonet's casting generated its own controversy. She was starring in The Cosby Show at the time, and her decision to appear in a film requiring nudity caused significant tension. Cosby himself reportedly pressured her to withdraw. She refused. The fallout contributed to her eventual departure from the show. The voodoo and Santeria content generated criticism from practitioners who felt the film presented their traditions as inherently sinister. Parker's defense was that the film was about devil worship, but that distinction is less clear in the imagery. No studio would make Angel Heart today with this level of graphic content. Baspeyu, the explicit sexuality would be flagged, the violence would be flagged, the religious content would be flagged. The combination of all three without clear moral framing would be considered commercially unviable. Naughty number 2. Fatal Attraction, 1987. Adrian Lyne directed this one for Paramount Pictures with a budget of approximately $14 million and delivered one of the most commercially successful films of the decade, grossing over $320 million worldwide. It also delivered one of the most damaging depictions of mental illness mainstream Hollywood produced, a portrayal so influential that it literally entered the language. Calling someone a bunny boiler became common parlance, which meant millions absorbed a vision of borderline personality disorder, filtered through thriller framework. Michael Douglas plays Dan Gallagher, a New York attorney who has a weekend affair with Alex Forrest, played by Glenn Close, while his wife is out of town. Dan considers it a contained indiscretion. Alex considers it the beginning of a relationship. When Dan attempts to end contact, Alex escalates, first through emotional appeals, then self-harm, then stalking, then direct threats against Dan's family. Close has spoken extensively about her regret regarding how the character was portrayed, acknowledging the film contributed to stigmatization of mental illness, and particularly to demonization of women experiencing psychological distress. The original ending had Alex committing suicide. Test audiences rejected it so thoroughly that Paramount mandated reshoots, producing the bathtub confrontation that became the theatrical ending. That finale transforms Alex from a woman experiencing a mental health crisis into a monster requiring violent elimination. The film's gender politics were immediately controversial. Feminist critics argued Fatal Attraction was a reactionary backlash film designed to punish female sexuality by presenting the single career woman as psychologically damaged and dangerous. The film's sympathies are entirely with Dan, who initiated the affair and lied, but who the film presents as a victim of Alex's unreasonable expectations. No contemporary studio would make Fatal Attraction with this specific characterization of mental illness. Mental health advocacy would generate immediate script notes. The gender politics would be flagged as regressive. The ending would be considered implausible and harmful. The film's success is precisely what convinced studios that sensitivity reviews were necessary. Number 1. Blue Velvet, 1986.
Name that keeps coming up is this woman's singer.
I'll bet someone could learn a lot by getting into that woman's apartment.
David Lynch wrote and directed this one for De Laurentiis Entertainment Group with a budget of approximately $6 million and delivered something so transgressive that its critical reception ranged from rapturous praise to genuine moral revulsion. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars. Several critics called it disgusting and unwatchable. The film grossed approximately $8.5 million domestically, acceptable on its modest budget, but its real impact came through home video, where it built a devoted following. Kyle MacLachlan plays Jeffrey Beaumont, a college student who returns to his North Carolina hometown and discovers a severed human ear. He investigates and meets Dorothy Valens, a nightclub singer played by Isabella Rossellini, and Frank Booth, played by Dennis Hopper, a psychopath who has kidnapped Dorothy's husband and child to force her into a sadomasochistic relationship that Lynch depicts with graphic specificity. The scene in Dorothy's apartment where Jeffrey hides in the closet and watches Frank abuse Dorothy is one of the most disturbing sequences in American cinema. Hopper's performance is genuinely frightening. Frank inhales gas from a mask, hits Dorothy, forces her to undress, and the film holds on this for a duration that transforms it from shocking incident into sustained horror. Jeffrey watches from the closet. The audience watches Jeffrey watching. Lynch is deliberately implicating both. The film's treatment of Dorothy's victimization has generated sustained debate. Rossellini appears nude repeatedly. She is subjected to graphic violence. Some critics argue Lynch is examining the male gaze. Others argue that regardless of critical intentions, the actual imagery participates in exactly the exploitation it claims to examine. Dean Stockwell performs Roy Orbison's In Dreams in one of the film's most surreal sequences. Laura Dern plays Sandy, Jeffrey's conventional romantic interest. No contemporary studio would make Blue Velvet. The graphic sexual violence would be rejected immediately. The extended brutalization would be flagged as exploitative. The film Lynch made was possible because De Laurentiis gave him creative control, and mid-80s independent distribution created space for genuinely transgressive work. That space has been systematically reduced. These 11 films were products of a decade willing to depict content contemporary studios systematically avoid. Some should never have been made the way they were. Others pushed boundaries in ways that feel genuinely harmful now. All document how drastically standards have shifted. The shift represents progress regardless.